Story 1. The Office Search. Submitted by Sheila. I used to work in this old office building in the city. It wasn't one of those fancy skyscrapers, but it was decent enough. The company I worked for was on the 7th floor. Most of the time, I'd leave work around 5 or 6 p.m., but there were days when I had to stay late to finish up some tasks. One evening, I was working on a project that was due the next morning. I remember glancing at the clock and seeing it was already past 9 p.m. The office was eerily quiet, with just the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional click of my mouse. Most of the lights were off, except for the ones near my desk. I decided to take a break and went to the pantry to make myself a cup of coffee. As I was waiting for the water to boil, I heard a soft tapping sound. I brushed it off, thinking it was probably just the building settling or something. But then, the tapping grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like it was coming from one of the windows. Curiosity got the better of me, so I walked over to the window. The view from the 7th floor was mostly other buildings and the dimly lit streets below. I didn't see anything unusual. Maybe it was just a tree branch or something, I thought. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on my work, but then I heard a soft whisper. It was so faint that I thought I was just imagining things. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. "Is anyone there?" I froze. The voice sounded like it was coming from the hallway outside my office. I slowly got up and peeked out. The corridor was dimly lit, and I didn't see anyone. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No response. I was about to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Then I heard a door creak open further down the hall. I knew everyone had left hours ago. My heart raced as I tried to decide what to do. I thought about calling security, but my phone was at my desk. Gathering courage, I decided to investigate. I walked slowly down the corridor, trying to pinpoint which door had opened. As I approached the conference room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I gently pushed it open. To my shock, there was a man inside, rummaging through the drawers of the conference table. He looked up, and our eyes met. He wasn't someone I recognized. He was tall, with a scruffy beard, and a look of surprise on his face. Without thinking, I screamed and bolted for the exit. I could hear him chasing after me. I dashed to the elevators, but they seemed to take forever. I could hear his footsteps getting closer. In a split-second decision, I turned and ran for the stairwell, praying he wouldn't catch up. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I made it to the ground floor and burst out of the building, gasping for breath. I ran a few blocks before I dared to look back. Thankfully, he wasn't following me. I called the police, and they searched the building. Turns out the guy was a known thief who had been targeting office buildings in the area. They never caught him that night, but they did a few weeks later. The thought of working late and being alone in that building was just too much. I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't decided to investigate that whisper. Story 2. The Sad Owner. Submitted by JC. Once I worked this desk job downtown. Nothing to write home about, just your typical 9 to 5. But this one night, man, I'll never forget it. I was working late, trying to catch up on some reports. Most of my colleagues had already left, and the office was eerily quiet. You know that feeling when you're alone in a big building and every little sound seems amplified? Yeah, that was me that night. Around 10 p.m., I decided to take a break and grab coffee from the break room. The lights in the hallway were on a timer, and they dimmed down to this low, almost orangey glow. It was creepy, but I ignored it. I mean, I'd been in the office late before. But as I was walking down the hallway, I heard a door creak open behind me. I turned around, expecting to see a janitor, or maybe one of my coworkers who was also burning the midnight oil. But there was no one there. Just an open door leading to one of the conference rooms. I thought it was weird, but maybe there was a draft or something. So I closed the door and continued on my way. After getting my coffee, I started heading back to my desk. But as I passed the same conference room, I heard a voice. It was so soft I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a human voice. I froze. I was sure I was alone. I slowly approached the door and peeked inside. The room was empty, but the overhead projector was on, casting a blue light on the screen. I was seized by a sudden coldness. I quickly turned off the projector and left the room, making sure to lock the door behind me. I tried to convince myself that maybe someone had been in there earlier and forgot to turn it off. But that voice, I couldn't explain that. I went back to my desk, trying to shake off the unease. I put on some music to drown out the silence and tried to focus on my work. But about half an hour later, I heard a soft knock on my office door. I looked up, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. The hallway outside my office was empty. Now, I was genuinely freaked out. I decided to pack up my stuff and get the hell out of there. But as I was shutting down my computer, I heard that voice again. This time it was louder, clearer. It was coming from the vents. It sounded like someone was saying, "Don't leave." I bolted. I grabbed my bag and ran for the elevators. But as I was waiting for the elevator to arrive, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I didn't dare turn around. The elevator doors finally opened, and I rushed inside, frantically pressing the close button. As the doors were closing, I took a quick glance outside. There, at the end of the hallway, stood a man. He was tall, wearing an old-fashioned suit. And his face, God, his face was pale and emotionless. Our eyes locked for a split second before the doors shut completely. I've never been so relieved to get out of a building. Later, I found out from a coworker that the building used to be a hotel. The owner had fallen into a deep depression after the hotel went bankrupt. He died in that very building, and my company bought it shortly after. Some said they'd seen his figure wandering the halls, perhaps mourning the loss of his once beloved establishment. Story 3. The Abandoned Floor. Submitted by Joanne. I used to work in one of those old towers that had been around for decades. And while most of the building had been renovated and modernized, there were still a few floors that remained untouched. At the time, my company occupied the 10th and 11th floors, but I'd heard rumors about the 13th floor, and how it was abandoned. Some said it used to be a storage area. Others said it was just old and unsafe. No one really knew, and honestly, no one cared. One evening, I was working late, trying to finish up a project. The office was mostly empty, with just a few of us scattered around. I remember feeling drained and just wanting to get home. I packed up my stuff, said my goodbyes, and headed for the elevator. I pressed the button for the ground floor, and as the doors closed, I took a moment to check my phone. But then, something weird happened. Instead of going down, the elevator started moving up. I remember thinking it was strange, but maybe someone on a higher floor had called it. I waited, expecting it to stop on the 12th or maybe even the 14th, but it didn't. The display showed 13. Before the doors even opened, I heard it, a faint sound of chuckling. It sounded like a group of people, maybe having a conversation. My heart was pounding. I thought, who would be up on the 13th floor at this hour? The elevator dinged and the doors slowly slid open. The lights from the elevator illuminated a small section of the floor, but beyond that, it was pitch black. The chuckling had stopped. There was no one there, just an empty, dusty, and abandoned floor. Old office furniture covered in sheets, paint peeling off the walls, and a thick layer of dust everywhere. I frantically pressed the button to close the elevator doors, but they wouldn't budge. I was on the verge of panicking when I heard footsteps. They were soft but deliberate, coming from the darkness beyond the elevator's light. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel someone or something approaching. I don't know what came over me, but I yelled out, "Who's there?" No answer. Just the sound of those footsteps getting closer and closer. I tried the buttons again, pressing them repeatedly, praying for the doors to close. Just as the footsteps sounded like they were right in front of me, the elevator doors finally began to close. I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure just outside the door, but it was too dark to make out any details. The elevator began its descent, and I was shaking uncontrollably. When I reached the ground floor, I practically ran out of the building. The security guard at the front desk looked up, surprised by my panicked state. I quickly told him what had happened, and he went pale. He told me that no one was supposed to be on the 13th floor, and that he hadn't seen anyone go up there all evening.